Hello, my name is Dr. Bagnell, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist at the IWK Health Center and Dalhousie University. I'm going to be talking about coping with change and uncertainty during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to start with two kind of scary words, uncertainty and fear. They're two words that we're all pretty familiar with, particularly in the last number of months. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with a virus such as COVID-19, and we've all seen a lot of change. And there's been a lot of new things that come at us kind of rapidly. We also had a very, very fast change in how we were living. With that came a lot of fear. We were scared for ourselves, for our families, for our loved ones. And those two things together, that uncertainty and that fear, can sometimes paralyze us. It can make us think, oh my gosh, this is never going to get better. Our lives are never going to go back to normal. And we can stop what I would call functioning or doing the things that we would usually be able to do and enjoy doing. And so I'm hoping from this talk that you will get some strategies for both yourself and for your students about how to cope with uncertainty and fear. Because we know that those two things are going to be around for a while. We know that they exist anyway, but pandemics kind of make them a little bit more noticeable. And we also know that some of our strategies for dealing with uncertainty, which is to then be trying to be 100% certain about something, are not really going to work with this. And we have to learn how to cope with some uncertainty. And there are strategies to do that. And we can do them for ourselves, and we can also teach that to our kids. So I'm going to start with going to the brain. All this happens in the brain. So fear really originates from the brain. It's very powerful, and it's really important. Fear is what keeps us alive. It makes us make decisions in life and death situations, and it also helps us in new situations. One of the core things in fear, in terms of our brain parts, is called the amygdala. And that is our fright-flight center. And it gets activated in situations where we are fearful, we feel in danger, and it's important for our survival. The problem is that if our amygdala gets overactivated or is activated all the time, that can put a lot of stress on our brain and our body, and it also makes it difficult to cope and do the things that we need to do. So the strategies that we're going to talk about are going to be around how do we cope with it so that our amygdala is not really activated all the time, and how do we help our students and our kids cope with that as well. So I always say to start with the facts, because the facts are really part of how we kind of ground ourselves in what's real and what's not. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, as we all know, and you know as educators. The internet is not always our friend, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet that is not true. And we need to be able to help kids figure that out. And we also have to watch it for ourselves. We can sometimes get ourselves reading stuff and then following another link and another link that may not be that helpful and actually might not be factual. So I'm going to go through some of the facts we know about COVID-19. So we know COVID-19 is a new type of virus. It's from the family coronavirus, and one of the other names for it is SARS-CoV-2. It spreads from person to person. We also know it's spread by close contact, usually within 6 feet of a person who's sick, through respiratory droplets or by contact of the virus on your hands and then to your face. Usually, COVID-19 causes mild to moderate symptoms that are similar to flu. And some of the most common ones are cough, sore throat, fever. However, we also know that in some individuals, particularly elderly individuals and those who have underlying medical conditions, the symptoms can be a lot worse, and they can get very sick, and some people die from COVID-19. And that is really what causes a lot of our fear response and our worries about friends and relatives who may be in these categories. I think it's good to talk about past pandemics because it kind of puts things historically into focus as to what have we learned from other pandemics, and we have been through this before. Maybe not me personally, because I wasn't actually alive in 1918, although my kids think I might have been alive in 1918, but there was a pandemic called the Spanish flu that a lot of people have referenced with this current pandemic. It infected 1/3 of the world population, 50 million deaths. It is still known as the deadliest pandemic in history, and I think that does bring up a fear response, right? How different is this pandemic from that one? Interestingly, in that pandemic, it was younger people who were more impacted than older people, which is different than COVID-19. We also know there have been two pandemics since then. One is the SARS, and these have happened in our lifetime, and the other is the H1N1 in 2009. Both of these pandemics were different than the current COVID-19. SARS was a very deadly virus, and it did not spread rapidly because of that. So there were a lot of high, what we say, mortality, people dying from it, but not that many cases. The H1N1, on the other hand, a lot of people were infected with that. What was different about that is that they were able to come up with a vaccine very quickly, and that's because influenza already had a vaccine, and they were able to adapt that in terms of the H1N1 virus. COVID-19, as we know, does not have a vaccine, and they are working on it. And we also know that the data is changing daily in terms of number of cases. So the data up there today on my slide will be different when you watch this. We also know that the mortality rate for this virus is very variable. And that is because different places have different mortality rates, different amounts of testing. And so it is really hard to tell how it's going to compare to other pandemics. But we do know that about 80% or more of cases are pretty mild to moderate, and that young people seem to do better and have less of the illness than older people. And we also know that the risk is higher in older age groups. Now I'm going to take you through a rapid change in what the landscape in Nova Scotia has looked like. I think that's good because we all have lived it in Nova Scotia, but it's sometimes good to see it laid out. Oh yeah, we have gone through a lot of change. There has been a lot that we've adapted to in the last 6 months. Boy, we're doing really well. That's what I want you to get from these next few slides. So this is the timeline of Nova Scotia events. This tells us sort of starting from March when the pandemic was declared, all the way through to July 31st when Nova Scotia made masks mandatory in indoor spaces. You can see the many different changes that we've had to adapt to during this timeline as new information became available. That can sometimes be really frustrating and hard to understand as to why do rules change, why are things changing, and it's because this virus is new. And we have researchers all around the world looking at the data, but it takes us a while to figure out, oh, this is the pattern, this is what's going on. And so as we get new evidence, as that evidence becomes really tested and tried and true, then new information comes forward with what we should be doing to keep ourselves and others safe. And that is why you've seen changes over time. You can see in Nova Scotia, we've also had some really serious events, tragedies, losses, that have also impacted our province during this time. And, you know, pandemics are hard enough and all the changes we've had to go through, but on top of that, to have had these losses within our province, to have had these experiences where people have really had stress and loss and grief has really added another layer that is really very difficult to quantify or explain as to what that's going to mean. We do know that people cope in different ways and that pandemics do increase our stress, so we know that it has been harder, but we also know that human beings are incredibly resilient and adaptable, and we rely on our supports, and in many ways our province has really rallied and supported those that have experienced these losses. There's been a lot, is what I would say, going on in the last number of months, and this barely captures it, I know, for many of us. And then there's individual experiences that all of us are going through. So that's our Nova Scotia timeline. I'm going to move into something that's a bit of a positive story in terms of Nova Scotia right now, which is this. So there are not many curves like this in the world right now. This is our Nova Scotia number of cases. And from the very beginning, you heard Premier McNeil and Dr. Robert Strang talk about how we needed to flatten the curve. This is what a flattened curve looks like. There are very few places that have curves as flat as this, I will say. So we are very fortunate. We live in a very, very good place in terms of the virus, and everyone in our province has contributed to this success. Our kids have, you have, our educators, people who've sacrificed by coming home, working from home, doing things in a different way to reduce spread of this virus has led to this curve, which is flat and means that we are in a very good place in terms of moving back to school. So just from a very positive perspective, living in our province. In terms of where the virus falls in terms of age ranges, it's looking at the percentage of people impacted in different age ranges. We can see that young people under 19 are only accounting for about 10% of the cases. Most of the cases are actually happening in older age groups, and that is an important piece of data as we move forward, and very reflective of data across the world in terms of what we know about age groups affected. And these are the most updated public health measures. And we know that there's been change in those. As we learn more about the virus, as we learn more about the science, we then change our public health measures accordingly. That can be very frustrating. It's also hard for us sometimes to understand, but also for our kids to understand as to why didn't they know that before? Why are we doing that now and we weren't doing it before? But it's because a lot of information on this virus is new, and it takes time to actually find out the science and the evidence to know if something is helpful to do or not that helpful to do. And so some of our changes have occurred later on because we didn't have the information when we were first learning about the virus. And that is something that we can teach our kids in terms of sometimes we don't know at first, and we have to learn, and we have to talk to other people, and we have to learn from other people in the world, and then based on best science, we can actually make a change. And I think that is helpful because the change parts of rapid change and different messages, or they feel different, is really a stepwise progression of learning about something that is new and novel and that we haven't seen in the world before. So now I'm going to do some strategies for coping with uncertainty and change. I say these are strategies we can use ourselves, and I try and use them, and when I don't use them, I don't do as well, so I really try and use them. And they're also strategies that we can teach our students. You can teach kids, and they can use them. I always say about strategies that it is good to find the ones that work for you. So some of them will not be as relevant, or they just don't really fit. And some of them will be your go-tos, and you want to find your go-to strategies. But the very first one, I'm going to say, is everyone's strategy that they need to try and prioritize. And that is taking care of yourself. Both yourself and getting your students to take care of themselves, encouraging friends and family to take care of themselves. And the main reason for that, besides the obvious one, which is taking care of yourself is going to improve your health, your mental health, is you can't pour from an empty cup, which really means you're not going to be able to help others. It's going to be really hard to be engaged as a teacher if you're not taking care of yourself, because during a pandemic, your stress level is going to be higher. There is no way around it. It will be higher, and you have to figure out ways to manage it. So the self-care part is a priority. Many people think, I don't have time for that. I have time to take care of myself. There's so many other people that need me or need a part of me. But you will not be able to do as much for others if you don't take the time to take care of yourself. So I say, think about what you'd say to a friend. If you can't seem to get it into your head, like you should do this for yourself, and think about what you need to do to improve your self-care. And we all have something that we could do to improve our self-care, whether it's getting a better sleep, doing a little bit more physical activity, eating a bit better, taking time with friends to have fun, taking breaks, making sure that we do things that what I call fuel us or give us energy to balance out the things that take energy away from us, and really checking in about our cup. There will be times where your cup will be pretty low, maybe getting close to empty, and those are times where you need to invest more energy in your self-care. And teaching your students about that as well is really key, making sure that students know, yes, this is important. My self-care is one of the key things I can do to cope through this. The next thing is being mindful. And you might have heard a bit about that if you attended the wellness webinar, but being mindful is a really broad term for how do we manage our thoughts and worries. What about when our thoughts and emotions get really big or overwhelming? How do we actually control them and manage them so that we aren't paralyzed by them and we can move forward? One technique is called the stop technique, and this starts with stop, and then you take a breath, and I'll do that. And then you observe your thoughts. And when you observe your thoughts, you don't go through all of them and think about what you're worried about. You actually try and take away from the emotion and just kind of think about the thoughts and kind of watch them and think about them and try and detach from the emotion part of it so that you can actually move forward, and that's the proceed. So it is a really good technique if something's really overpowering you at once to take a moment and stop and then give yourself the time to breathe and then move forward. Other mindfulness techniques include the 5 senses. Many of us have learned those to help our students when they're feeling emotionally overwhelmed. They could be angry, upset, anxious, worried. And it's using our brain really to reset our brain. So we use our senses, and that brings information into our brain to downregulate our amygdala. And that really helps us calm down. So the 5 senses work by paying attention to 5 things you see. And I usually say young people usually do better with 3 main senses, which is seeing, hearing, and feeling. They have a lot more trouble with the smelling and tasting 5 things because, as you can imagine, that's a little bit trickier to do. So we will just focus on the seeing, hearing, and feeling. And an example of this would be 5 things I see. I would say this usually in my head, but I'll say it out loud. I see a star. I see an exit sign. I see a camera. I see a light. I see a chair. Then you do 5 things you hear, and you think those in your head. And then 5 things you feel. And that could be how your clothes feel on your body, how your feet feel on the floor, the temperature of your body. It could be whether you feel hungry or whether you feel full. And it could be how you feel sitting in your chair. So 5 things you feel is another way to bring that sense into it. So if you do those things, you actually will notice that your body calms down and your thoughts calm down because you're really focused on those senses, and it is a downregulation of your amygdala in your brain. So teaching your kids that as well in the classroom can be really helpful. The third thing that really helps when you are already feeling uncertain about things and there already have been a lot of changes is being able to have some sort of routine and good communication around that routine. So there are things that will change and there are things that are uncertain, but there are things that we know will be happening and we can plan around. And so being able to communicate that, what are students going to expect when they walk into the school? What should they expect is their role when they walk into school? Communicating their excitement about having them back and being back in school, and also communicating what a schedule is going to look like. Helping parents to know that this is what to expect so they can help their kids know what a routine in the school is going to look like, because it will look different than it was, and the more that students and kids know about that, the better they're going to do with adapting to those changes before they walk into the school. The communication being regular and expected also really helps, even if there isn't any change at that point. It kind of gives that, I call it support and confidence of, we know we will always get this communication from the school at this point in the week or this point in the month. And it kind of gives that reassurance that there will be a contact and they'll know if there's any changes coming up. Talking about emotions is another thing with helping with coping with uncertainty and change, and that's because people can feel a whole bunch of emotions at this time. And sometimes they can come onto you really suddenly, like unexpectedly. Like you're doing something and all of a sudden you're like really feeling, wow, I'm really exhausted right now, or I'm really upset about this, or I'm kind of really scared about this. And there might not be something that happened, it just kind of hits you. And being able to talk about how you're feeling and normalizing those feelings, that everyone's having those feelings at different times, and that it's okay to have those feelings and talk about those feelings, and even sharing your own experience of having some of those feelings and how you coped with it or what you did can be really validating for kids and make them feel like, oh, I'm not alone in this. This is happening for everyone. That's okay. It's okay to feel scared at times, but this is what I should do about it. I don't want to stop everything I'm doing at that time. I want to actually figure out, how do I cope with it when I'm scared? Who do I talk to? What do I do with my thoughts and worries? And then how do I move forward so I can keep going on with my day? I also say focusing on the positives is really important. The positives are what give you great endorphins in your brain, and they really make you feel like, okay, yeah, I can do this. They give you more of a positive outlook. And a lot of times in times of uncertainty, we tend to go towards more of the negative. Well, I don't know that, and we don't know what to expect, and we don't know if this is going to happen or that's going to happen. But there are some things we do know and that are quite positive. So you can emphasize those. You can talk about strong leadership in our province and how we flatten the curve. You can talk about everyone's role in doing that and how important and awesome it is that our young people, our adults, and our older adults all did this together. You can talk about researchers that are working on a vaccine, and here in our own province, work is going on in that. You can talk about healthcare professionals that are there to help and how our healthcare system is really strong, and we have really great resources to support people who do get sick. You can also talk about history and what have we learned from other pandemics, and how does that help in sort of thinking about what will we gain as a society from this? What will be the things moving forward that will really help us in the future? And then looking at positive stories. So thinking about what have people been doing that has been on the positive side, being grateful about things in our life that maybe we don't take the time to be grateful for, and then recognizing what that does for our brain. So being grateful, being thankful, and doing things for others are really good brain health activities, and doing a little bit of that each day is a very helpful strategy for managing stress. There's 3 strategies that we try and teach young people here at the IWK, but also as adults we can use, which are positive thinking, realistic thinking, and problem solving. So I'm going to talk about positive thinking. One of the things about positive thinking is that we tend to, when we're feeling overwhelmed, go to the negative. And we all know that. It's a very easy place to go when you're feeling overwhelmed, scared, tired, or had a bad day. And it can color your whole day into a very negative light. And you actually have trouble then remembering anything positive that happened. So looking at your day and having to stop before you get into the negative spiral and actually talk about 2 positive things that have happened. And you can use this with your students too. So if you're noticing a student is going into a big negative spiral, you're like, okay, you know what we're going to work on? We're going to work on coming up with 2 positive things first before you start to talk about the negative. And what's interesting is if they really work on the positive and they find those 2 things, they might still have some negative things, but it's not everything in the whole day. And the positive things, it's really important to get them to be specific. They can be other things that people have done, or they noticed someone did something positive, but they can't be, this day was not as bad as yesterday, or I didn't do things as badly as I did yesterday. Because that's kind of like a negative positive, which isn't the same as going for a positive. So it has to be something positive that happened, and they have to come up with 2 things. Another way to do some positive thinking is to set up small goals. Really important to pick realistic goals for both ourselves and for our students, because they need to be things that are attainable. Otherwise, you just feel like, well, great, I had all these goals this week and I didn't even get any of them done. That does not make you feel better. So picking things that are important to you, but also small and manageable that you can sort of say by the end of the week, wow, look at what we did, or what we did as a class can make a big difference. And then I've been in lots of really cool classrooms where there's positive statements on the wall. And some people say, well, does that really help? It's a really good thing. So positive statements and positive words surrounding you can really help, because you actually take in a lot all the time, even when you're not really conscious of it in your environment, and you notice things. So having positive words around and things that make people feel empowered and that they can cope can make a huge difference in how they feel through the day. Things that we want to focus on are the things that we can control. So when we talk about going into the problem solving, the realistic thinking, one of the things where we can get stuck and where kids can get stuck is we tend to worry about things that are out of our control and not the things that are in our control. And it is really hard to form an action plan around things that we can't control because we can't control them. So we need to think about what's in our control. So when we are worried, we will work on, okay, so I'm worried about all these things that are not in my scheme of doing anything about. But what is something that I could do something about? And that is going to then make you feel empowered, or help a student feel empowered to say, oh, okay, so I can do something about that. And having an action or something that you can do and cope with will make you feel a lot better and make those things that are out of your control feel less powerful. So that brings us to problem solving and realistic thinking. So the first part in problem solving is identifying the problem. And going back to the previous slide, you want to pick something that is in your control as a problem to be solved. If it is a problem that is out of your control, then it's pretty tough to find a solution around it, and it will not make you feel better. So you want to find the problem within that actually is within your control. What are the things that you can do something about? An example of this would be, the problem that you're worried about might be, I don't know if I'm going to be able to teach as well as I did before, because a lot has changed. The classroom's going to be different, things will be different. With the students, people will be more stressed, I will be more stressed. How am I going to do with teaching? So that's the problem. What are the things that are in your control with that? And I'm going to go back to, of course, the first thing is self-care. So am I doing a good job of taking care of myself? What are the things in that might be a problem in that right now for me? And what are the things I could do in terms of solving that problem to make sure that I'm taking care of myself? Then there might be another thing that you could do in terms of what are the things I could do to prepare in the classroom to get ready for this change. And that would be making that list and then kind of checking off the ones that are reasonable. And just having those action things will make a difference in not feeling like things are way out of control or that you're not going to be able to be a good teacher in this new environment. In realistic thinking, you want to pick the worry that, so the worries tend to pick things that are unrealistic and you want to try and make it realistic. So worries tend to be very catastrophizing. We say they're extreme, they usually are in the sort of far end of being unrealistic, and you want to make that worry more realistic. So we teach kids to be good detectives. So they might think, let's say a student is really worried that they're going to get sick at school. And so the realistic thing is, well, we can't say 100% no one is going to get sick. That wouldn't be very realistic. What are the things you can do about that, though, to prevent? And what is the role of everyone in that? So what are the things you're already doing from a public health perspective, from a safety perspective, within the classroom, within the school that are already in existence to keep you safe? And really emphasizing that so that the realistic thing becomes a more realistic worry, that I am doing everything I can, and so are others, to make sure that I'm safe. And that is why I can be in school. And those kind of things to make it more realistic and less catastrophizing are really key skills. And lastly, not to forget a very important thing of staying connected. So one of the things about going back to school is that kids will see their friends, we will see our colleagues. I know that being apart from people and being online and virtual, although it has still kept us somewhat connected, it is not the same for human beings as being in the same space. So really knowing that we are getting connected again with our important supports can make a big difference in our mental health, and also help us in our coping. Encouraging that for our students and for ourselves and for our family, of using our supports, making sure that we push ourselves, even if we're tired at the end of the day, because it does take more energy when you're stressed already to do the parts of your job and work with kids and help them handle stuff, but making sure you do that self-care and stay connected to people and taking the time for yourself to do the things that fuel you. So listening to music, getting out in nature, connecting with your friends and family, and making that a priority, because from a brain health perspective, as social beings, we really need it, and we need it probably now more than ever. So really trying to make sure that you're getting that good dose of staying connected and that your students are too. So the last couple slides are just really some things to add into your day and try and remember. One is humor. And humor is so very important. Sometimes under stress, we do lose our humor, our sense of humor, or we're not bringing it out to the forefront. And trying to build that into our day. Laughter is an amazing medicine. This is a meme. There were many, I know, many of us were sharing them throughout when we were more in isolation, and seeing these made us laugh. And I think that I remember chains where we got shared the same one many, many times by so many people. I think people just looking for ways to connect and to make each other laugh. And this one also could be a good math problem for those of you that teach math, in terms of how might this not be meeting all of the physical distancing requirements needed. But really using humor throughout your day and in your life is really important for coping. So in summary, how can you help? And these skills are for yourselves as well as for your students. So first of all, being open, being able to talk about emotions and that it's okay. It's okay to sometimes not be okay. It's okay to talk about how you're feeling, but also you need to do something about it. So if you are feeling that, validating those emotions, but then how are you going to cope with them? And that's the next step. So not just sitting in the emotion, but what are you going to do? Correcting how people might have some misinformation at times about this, so giving accurate information. And if you hear inaccurate information, really helping students to understand what's true and what's not, what do we have evidence about and what we don't, because inaccurate information can really increase anxiety and stress around this, and it can also make uncertainty even greater. Monitoring, so monitoring and checking in, staying connected, knowing what people are experiencing, and also, teachers are often the first to notice when kids are struggling, and really being able to know, like, to check in with that and to have supports if you were worried about a child. Prioritizing, and that goes under the self-care as well as being realistic and positive thinking, which is you need to be able to set up real goals for yourself, because we all have high standards at times for ourselves, but realistic goals. And be realistic about what you can accomplish. When we are under stress, we tend to not be able to do quite as much as we could before, and that's okay. That's going to be true for our students and young people as well. We need to think about that. So how do you prioritize? What are the things that really need to get done right now? What are the things that are good enough, and maybe not perfect, but good enough, and being okay with that, and still feeling like that's something that you've accomplished. So the prioritizing is important, and then being forgiving of yourself that it won't be quite maybe to all of your standards as it was before. And then emphasizing what's in your control, and the things that you are already doing to cope well, the things that you're doing to protect yourself and others, and also the things that you're doing to help others are all important things to emphasize. Morgan Freeman said this best, but we know that young people really learn more from watching us and seeing how we're doing than listening to us, unfortunately, although I think sometimes they do listen to us as well. But they really do watch us, and they really watch how we're coping, what we're doing. So I say words like, try and be yourself, be real, be calm as you can, but realize you're not going to be perfect. Be kind to yourself, and know that everything's not going to go great every day, but you can actually be okay with talking about that and how you cope. So you can be a real role model for how you're coping with some stressful situations, or even sharing emotions that you have. So really think about that role, because I know for our young people, they really look to us as to how we're coping, and they learn the most from watching us and what we're doing. And if you're worried about a student, there are many supports in the school, as you know, in terms of guidance, Schools Plus, school mental health clinicians, reaching out to family and caregivers, but do not worry alone. So if you're worried about a student or you're worried about a colleague, do not worry alone, and reach out for help. And this is just to remind you that that in itself is a skill, is asking for help and teaching our students, but also for ourselves, that it's okay to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness, and it's actually a sign of good coping to reach out for help when we need it. A great resource that we recommend is a free resource. It's an app from Anxiety Canada. It's called the MindShift CBT app, and CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is just a fancy way for helping how you think and how you behave to manage your fears, worries, and stress. And it has great skills and tools about relaxation, imagery, how you think realistically, positive statements, and it's for all age groups. Younger kids may have more difficulty with understanding some of the content, but it is really designed for all age groups, and it is free, and we do find that many young people really like it. And just lastly, in terms of resources, Anxiety Canada is the website I just talked about, and they have great information about COVID. They also have information about back to school. They have an educator section on helping kids with anxiety, but also helping kids cope with this change. They have webinars, and it's all free, and it's all Canadian. So I really recommend that website. Childmind.org has a great back to school section that has great resources. The Kids Help Phone has really good resources for kids about COVID and coping with fear and coping with stress, so I recommend that for kids. And then the Coping with Coronavirus COVID from the eMental Health site, which is in Ottawa. It is good information about COVID. There's a parent caregiver section and a young person section, and there's good information sheets there. And lastly, if you're really worried about a young person and you're reaching out to school, there is now one line provincially for mental health and addiction support, and that line will actually connect them to the appropriate resource in their community. So there's one provincial resource line now if you feel a young person needs more help in mental health and addictions than is currently available. And I really recommend using that. It's a great resource within our province. And I really thank you for your attention, and I wish you the very best.